Welcome to the Daily TV Mass Online Advent Retreat with Cardinal Thomas Collins. Sunday, second week of Advent, the Royal Psalms.
One of the clearest indicators in the Old Testament of the coming of the Messiah is found in the Royal Psalms. After the time of Saul, God agreed to give the people, at their request, a king who would govern them. There was much dispute about whether this was a good or a bad thing. Certainly there were glorious kings like David and Solomon, and a few righteous kings like Josiah. But on the whole, the kings were not often worthy of their sacred mission. Each one was anointed of the Lord, and yet so many of them failed and turned away from God. Much of the Old Testament history books are devoted to a record of their failure and their rejection of God. But in the book of Psalms, we find a series of royal psalms. Psalms 2, 18, 20, 21, 45, 72, 101, 110, 132, and 144, which were often used at the inauguration of the reign of those ancient rulers of Israel. And these psalms present us with a vision of justice, equity, and nobility in the king, the anointed one, sent by God. They may indeed be a way of looking back at David himself, although he was not without many faults. But they have been taken in the Christian tradition, including in the New Testament, as a sign of the coming of the one who would in fact be a truly just king, Christ the King, Jesus, our Lord. Psalm 2 is one of the royal psalms that is referred to in the New Testament. In its Hebrew context, it speaks of God's blessing upon the king, who will conquer the earthly kings who rage against God and his anointed. I will tell the decree of the Lord. He said to me, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." In the letter to the Hebrews, Psalm 2, which originally referred to the Hebrew king as divinely approved, is quoted as a sign of the superiority of Christ, the true king. For Jesus reflects the glory of God and bears the very stamp of his nature, upholding the universe by his word of power. When he has made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has obtained is more excellent than theirs. For to what angel did God ever say, "Thou art my son, today I have begotten thee"? When we read the royal psalms of the Old Testament, of course, we should first of all look, as the original author did, at the way in which these normative models of divinely instituted kingship rebuke the unworthy men who so often actually occupy the role of king and shepherd of God's people. And we can use them in our own day as a standard of righteous political leadership. But we can see more deeply, as did the writers of the New Testament, and recognize in their portrayal of the righteous king a prophecy of Christ, the one who was to come, and whose coming we celebrate at Christmas, for which we await in joyful expectation during the season of Advent. It is Christ who is our King. Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ conquers, Christ reigns, and Christ is Lord. When Pilate asked Jesus if he is the king of the Jews, fearing that he claimed to be an earthly rival to Caesar, Jesus replies, "My kingship is not of this world." He is indeed Christ the King, but infinitely exalted above earthly kingship. That is the one who came at Bethlehem, not an earthly ruler who would rescue the people from their earthly oppressors, but Christ the King, the Lord of the universe, who will come in glory at the end of time, and all his angels with him. He is the one foreshadowed in the ancient royal psalms. He is the one the early martyrs proclaimed when their Roman persecutors demanded that they say, "Caesar is Lord." No, they proclaimed, "Jesus is Lord." That was the message of St. Thomas More to the wicked earthly king Henry VIII. "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." That was the message of the glorious martyred Mexican Catholics of the 1920s, persecuted by a vicious secularist dictatorship. As the firing squad raised their rifles, the heroic Father Miguel Pro extended his arms in the form of a cross and shouted, "Long live Christ the King!" It is the coming of Christ the King that we await in Advent and that we celebrate at Christmas.
Join us tomorrow for Monday, the Advent Virtue.